An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters.
With CENTCOM saying that U.S. forces have struck more than 20 ships from the Iranian regime as Operation Epic Fury ramps up.
U.S. submarines sinking an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean. You can see those images that have come in now.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps fast attack boats fired anti-ship missiles at a United States Navy destroyer operating in the Strait of Hormuz, striking the vessel amidships and wounding 37 American sailors. The order came down from United States Central Command within the hour. Full retaliatory authorization. No restrictions on target selection within the pre-approved strike package. Every military asset in the TEHRAN and beyond received the execution order simultaneously. Beneath the surface of the Persian Gulf, 2 United States Navy Virginia-class fast attack submarines had been operating in silence for weeks, holding position at patrol depth, waiting for exactly this order. The first submarine, running at 4 knots just above the thermocline layer, received the emergency action message on the extremely low-frequency antenna trailing behind the boat. The communications officer tore the printout from the machine and carried it to the captain. The message was authenticated against the sealed codes kept in the commanding officer's safe. 2 officers verified independently. The codes matched. The order was valid. The captain picked up the intercom and announced to the crew that the ship was shifting to combat operations. Battle Stations Missile. The announcement echoed through every compartment. Sailors moved to their stations with rehearsed precision. Watertight doors were sealed. The weapons officer took his position at the fire control console in the control room. The vertical launch system status board lit up. 12 Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles sat in their individual launch tubes arranged in 2 rows forward of the sail. Each missile had been programmed days earlier with its target coordinates, ingress route, terrain following waypoints, and terminal attack profile. The weapons officer confirmed targeting data on every tube, tube 1 through 12, all green. The captain gave the order to come to launch depth. The diving officer adjusted the planes. The submarine rose slowly from patrol depth, leveling off at 60 feet below the surface. The periscope was not raised. There was no need to see the surface. Everything was done by instruments. The weapons officer selected tube 1. The launch sequence initiated. Pressurized gas flooded the tube. The outer door opened. The Tomahawk ejected from the tube, broke through the surface of the water in a violent eruption of spray and foam, and hung in the air for a split second before its solid rocket booster ignited. The missile climbed steeply, shedding its booster casing, and the turbojet cruise engine took over. Wings deployed. The Tomahawk leveled off at low altitude and turned toward the Iranian coastline, skimming above the water at 500 miles per hour. 6 seconds later, Tube 2 fired. Then Tube 3. Then 4. One after another, the missiles burst from the ocean surface in rapid succession. 12 Tomahawks were airborne within 90 seconds. The submarine immediately dove back to operating depth and turned away from the launch position, clearing the area before any counter-detection was possible. 3 miles to the east, the 2nd Virginia-class submarine executed the same sequence. Battle stations. Authentication. Launch depth. 12 more Tomahawks erupted from the water and climbed into the night sky. 24 cruise missiles were now racing toward Iranian military targets at low altitude, following pre-programmed routes that took them through valleys and over ridgelines, hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection. On the surface, the guided missile cruiser US, positioned in the central Persian Gulf, turned broadside and opened its vertical launch system hatches. The Mk-41 launcher cells dotted the fore and aft decks. The Combat Information Center below decks was fully manned. Radar operators tracked the surrounding airspace. Electronic warfare officers monitored Iranian radar emissions. The weapons control officer had his target list confirmed and loaded into the Aegis combat system. The captain authorized weapons release. The first Tomahawk erupted from its cell in a burst of orange flame and white smoke, punching straight up before tipping over and heading east. Then the next cell fired. Then, the next. The cruiser began a sustained barrage. Missile after missile launched from the deck, each one arcing away on a different heading toward a different target. Radar stations along the Iranian coast. Naval base infrastructure at Bandar Abbas. Revolutionary Guard command posts inland. Missile storage depots buried in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. The cruiser emptied an entire magazine section. 22 Tomahawks launched in under 4 minutes. Reload teams below decks were already preparing to move reserve missiles from the magazine into the empty cells using the ship's internal crane system. The ship would be ready to fire again within hours. Simultaneously, at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the alert horn blasted through the B-1B Lancer bomber squadron area. Flight crews who had been sleeping in the alert facility rolled out of their bunks, pulled on their flight suits and boots, grabbed their helmets and survival vests, and ran for the crew vehicles parked outside. The vans raced across the base toward the flight line, where 4 B-1B Lancers sat in their revetments, already preloaded with ordnance and fuel to maximum capacity. The B-1B Lancer was built for exactly this kind of mission. Each aircraft carried a massive internal payload across 3 weapons bays. Tonight, each bomber was loaded with 84 GBU 38 Joint Direct Attack munitions, 500-pound GPs guided bombs packed into the rotary launchers, and fixed racks inside the base. 84 precision weapons per aircraft. 4 aircraft. 336 guided bombs about to be dropped on Iranian military infrastructure in a single wave. The first crew reached their aircraft. The pilot climbed the ladder into the cockpit and strapped into the left seat. The co-pilot took the right. Below and behind them, the offensive systems officer and defensive systems officer climbed into the aft cockpit station and began powering up the AN APQ-164 synthetic aperture radar and the AN ALK-161 electronic countermeasure suite. The defensive systems would be critical tonight. Iranian air defenses, whatever survived the opening Tomahawk barrage, would be searching for the bombers. Engine start. The B-1B's 4 General Electric F-101 turbofan engines with afterburners spooled up one at a time. The sound was massive, a deep rolling thunder that shook the ground beneath the aircraft. Engine 1 stable. Engine 2 stable. 3 and 4 followed. All 4 running. The variable geometry wings were swept forward to the full spread position for takeoff, maximizing lift. The crew ran through an abbreviated pre-flight. No time for the full checklist tonight. Systems confirmed, weapons confirmed, navigation confirmed. The first B-1B released brakes and rolled out of the revetment onto the taxiway. It moved fast, not waiting for the standard taxi procedures. Straight to the runway. The aircraft lined up on the center line, wings spread wide. The pilot pushed all 4 throttles to full military power, then threw the detent into afterburner. 4 cones of blue-white flame erupted from the engine nacelles at the tail. The aircraft surged forward, accelerating rapidly down the runway. At rotation speed, the pilot pulled back on the stick and the B-1B lifted off, nose climbing steeply. Landing gear retracted immediately. The wings began sweeping back automatically as the aircraft gained speed, transitioning from the full spread takeoff position to the intermediate sweep for cruise climb. 90 seconds later, the second Lancer was rolling. Then the third, then the fourth. All 4 B-1Bs were airborne within 6 minutes, climbing out over the Gulf in a spread formation, heading north toward Iranian airspace. At altitude, the wings swept fully back to the 67-degree position for supersonic dash capability. The bombers accelerated through Mach 1, the shockwave rippling behind them as they crossed the sound barrier. They would cover the distance to the target area in under 40 minutes. In the skies ahead of the bombers, the Tomahawk cruise missiles were already arriving on target. The first wave hit the long-range surveillance radar at Bushehr. The missile dove from its cruise altitude, following the terminal attack profile, and slammed into the radar antenna at the base of the rotating array. The structure disintegrated. A fireball rolled upward, and the radar went dark on every screen monitoring Iranian air defense coverage. 14 seconds later, 2 more Tomahawks hit the SA-20 surface-to-air missile battery protecting the same sector. The first missile struck the engagement radar vehicle. The second hit the launcher transporter, detonating the ready missiles still in their tubes. A chain of secondary explosions rippled across the site, cooking off missile propellant and warheads. The entire battery was destroyed. Across the western Iranian defense zone, the pattern repeated. Tomahawk struck radar after radar, missile site after missile site. The S-300 battery near Isfahan took 4 direct hits. The command post at Disful was cratered. The early warning radar at Karamabad went offline. Communications relay stations linking the air defense network together were destroyed one by one, severing the connections between surviving units. Within 12 minutes of the first impact, the Iranian integrated air defense system in the western sector was functionally destroyed. Gaps opened across the coverage map like holes torn in a net. The B-1B flight lead received the battle damage assessment data through the secure data link. The corridor was confirmed open. He pushed the throttles forward, and the bombers descended to medium altitude, entering Iranian airspace through the gap in coverage. The offensive systems officers in the back seats activated the synthetic aperture radar and began mapping the target areas ahead. GP's coordinates for each aim point were already loaded into the weapons system. The bomb bay doors opened. The first target was an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps military base housing ballistic missile transporter erector launchers. The base spread across a valley floor with hardened vehicle shelters, maintenance buildings, a command post, fuel storage, and ammunition bunkers. The offensive systems officer selected the first 24 weapons from the forward bay rotary launcher. Target coordinates confirmed, weapons released. 24 Gibu 38s dropped from the aircraft in a steady stream, each one acquiring its GPS signal and adjusting its tail fins to guide toward its individual aim point. They fell in near silence, spreading out as they descended, each bomb tracking toward a different structure on the base. The first impacts hit the vehicle shelters. Reinforced concrete roofs collapsed inward as 500-pound warheads detonated inside. The maintenance buildings came apart. The fuel storage facility erupted in a massive fireball that rose 300 feet into the air, illuminating the entire valley. The command post took a direct hit through the roof. The ammunition bunkers were struck last, and the secondary explosions continued for several minutes as stored munitions cooked off in them. When the smoke began to clear, the base was unrecognizable. Craters, rubble, and burning wreckage covered the area. The B-1B did not circle back. It continued north toward the next target. Behind it, the second Lancer was already releasing its bombs on an Iranian drone manufacturing facility. 84 weapons, 84 aim points. Assembly buildings, storage warehouses, test facilities, runway infrastructure, fuel depots, everything inside the perimeter fence was being hit simultaneously. The 3rd and 4th bombers struck a missile production complex and a Revolutionary Guard naval headquarters, respectively. Each aircraft emptied its weapons bays in a single pass, delivering 84 precision weapons on target, and continued flying without slowing down. Back at Al Udeid, the ground crews were not waiting. The moment the bombers had cleared the runway on takeoff, the weapons loading teams moved into the empty revetments and began preparing for the second wave. Bomb trailers were towed in from the ammunition storage area. Pallets of Gibu 38 bomb bodies were cracked open. Guidance kit sections, the JDAM tail assemblies with GPS receivers and control fins, were attached to each bomb body by the weapons technicians. Torque wrenches tightened the mounting bolts. Electrical connections were tested. Each completed weapon was lifted onto a loading cart and wheeled into position for the returning aircraft. Fuel trucks repositioned. Maintenance teams stood by with replacement parts, hydraulic fluid, tire assemblies, and electronic components. The turnaround plan called for each B-1B to land, taxi directly to its revetment, shut down engines, and be simultaneously refueled, RARMed, and inspected. The target was a 4-hour turnaround. Every bomber back in the air for Wave 2 within 4 hours of landing from Wave 1. At the same time, at air bases across the Gulf region, additional strike packages were being prepared. F-15E Strike Eagles loaded with AM-158 JASSM-ER standoff cruise missiles, each missile carrying a 1,000-pound warhead and capable of hitting targets over 500 miles away without the launch aircraft entering enemy airspace. F-16CJ Wild Weasels armed with AM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles designed to hunt and destroy any Iranian radar that dared to turn on. E-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft loaded with jamming pods ready to blind whatever remained of the Iranian electronic order of battle. On the aircraft carrier operating in the Gulf of Oman, FA-18E and F Super Hornets were being catapulted off the flight deck in continuous rotation. 4 catapults working simultaneously, one launch every 45 seconds. The fighters climbed out over the water, formed up in 4 ship flights, and headed north. Combat air patrol stations were established along the Iranian border to intercept any aircraft the Iranians managed to launch. Strike packages of Hornets carrying JDAMs and laser-guided bombs headed inland to hit targets of opportunity identified by intelligence feeds in real time. On the ground in the Middle East, C-17 Globemaster IIIs were landing at forward airfields one after another, disgorging Army combat units. The ramps dropped, and soldiers filed out into the desert. Behind them, M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles rolled out of the cargo bays and drove down the ramps under their own power. Pallets of ammunition, Javelin anti-tank missile systems, Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, mortar systems, and crates of small arms ammunition were pulled from the aircraft by forklifts and staged on the tarmac for distribution. At a separate landing zone, CH-47 Chinook helicopters were delivering artillery. M777 lightweight, towed howitzers were slung beneath the helicopters on external cargo hooks. The Chinooks came in low, hovered over the pre-marked positions, and the ground crews unhooked the guns. The howitzers were immediately wheeled into firing positions by the artillery crews. Ammunition was broken out of crates, propellant charges sorted, fire direction center established. Within 30 minutes of the guns touching the ground, the first battery was ready to fire. 64E Apache Guardian attack helicopters launched from a forward staging area in groups of 4, Each Apache carried a full combat load. 16 AM-114 Hellfire missiles on the stub wing pylons, a full ammunition drum of 1,200 rounds for the M230 30mm chain gun mounted beneath the nose, and 76 Hydra 70 unguided rockets in the outboard pods. The Apaches flew low and fast over the desert terrain, heading toward the border area where Iranian proxy forces had been identified massing for a potential ground incursion. The pilots flew with night vision goggles, the terrain ahead rendered in green phosphor detail. The weapons systems officers in the front seats operated the target acquisition designation site, scanning the ground ahead with thermal imaging and laser designation systems. The first Apache flight reached the engagement area and identified a column of Iranian-supplied armored vehicles moving south along a mountain road. The flight lead called the contact report back to the Tactical Operations Center. Weapons free was confirmed. The lead Apache locked a Hellfire missile onto the first vehicle in the column, a T-72 tank variant. The pilot squeezed the trigger. The missile dropped from the pylon, its motor ignited, and it streaked across the valley, riding the laser beam to the target. The Hellfire struck the turret roof, the shaped-charge warhead penetrating the armor and detonating inside. The tank erupted. The turret lifted off the hull in a column of fire. Before the debris had finished falling, the second Apache had launched at the next vehicle, then the third, then the fourth. Hellfires crossed the valley in rapid succession. Vehicle after vehicle was hit. Armored personnel carriers split open, fuel trucks exploded, ammunition carriers detonated in spectacular secondary blasts that scattered burning debris across the road. The surviving vehicles tried to scatter off the road and into the terrain. The Apaches pursued. The 30mm chain guns opened up, the deep hammering sound rolling across the valley. Armor-piercing rounds shredded light vehicles and cut through infantry positions. The Hydra rockets fired in pairs, impacting in bright flashes along the tree lines where dismounted fighters had tried to take cover. Within 8 minutes, the entire column was destroyed. Burning hulks littered the road. No vehicle had escaped. The Apaches pulled off target, reformed, and headed back toward the forward area to rearm. Fresh Hellfire missiles and ammunition were already staged at the rearming point. The turnaround would take 15 minutes. They would be back in the fight before the next hour was over. At the operations center, the battle board updated continuously. Satellite imagery confirmed the damage from the B-1B strikes. Every target hit, every facility destroyed or rendered non-functional. The Tomahawk impact assessments showed similar results. Iranian air defenses in the western sector no longer existed. The submarine crews reported all missiles launched successfully and were repositioning for potential follow-on strikes. The carrier air wing had established complete air superiority over the operational area. Not a single Iranian aircraft had managed to get airborne. The second wave was being finalized. New target packages loaded, additional bombers being armed, more fighters being fueled. The refueling tankers were already airborne on their tracks, waiting for the next wave of strike aircraft. The operation was designed to run continuously, day and night. Wave after wave, no pause, no negotiation window. Every military target on the master list would be struck until the list was empty. The commanding general at the forward headquarters reviewed the next 12 hours of planned operations on the classified display. He turned to his staff and gave a single order: continue the attack.